Let me take the opportunity to introduce Ms. Keena Smith. Thank you for joining us tonight. Ms. Smith is the Deputy County Administrator for Franklin County, where she has oversight of 4 county agencies. And prior to joining Franklin County, she was a 17-and-a-half-year veteran of the City of Columbus, serving under the leadership of Mayor Michael Coleman and Mayor Andy Ginter. In 2016, Keena was named Outstanding Head of Diversity by Columbus Business First. She is a graduate of what is now the John Glenn College of Public Affairs and president of the local chapter of the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. I love this next fact, and I'm so impressed. Keena is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and therefore she is a sorority sister to Ms. Catherine Johnson, Ms. Dorothy Vaughn, and Ms. Mary Jackson, the new figures.
Thank you. Ms. Smith was also in the theater enjoying the movie. That's where they sent me, so I apologize. I'm sitting there just enjoying the movie, and my sorors actually came over and said, "You're supposed to be next to me, so please forgive me." And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So it's been pretty well established by research that if humans need to belong, it's probably one of the strongest drives we have, this need to belong. And it seems hardwired into our genetics as a people, and our culture kind of reinforces we're very tribal. It's also pretty well established by research that being outside the prevailing social group is extremely stressful. So I was wondering if our panelists could share their opinion about what personal qualities does a person need to have when they are a so-called outsider in a prevailing group. Let you go.
Sure. Thank you. So I thought this question was a really great question. I had to think about it for a while, and I think that's what actually separates people about their faith is so important. Perhaps if you do not believe in God, then perhaps you're grounded in something else. But having faith and having faith in yourself, I think, is super important. Another characteristic, I think, is emotional intelligence. It's certainly key to being aware of yourself and those around you and being able to respond in a positive way. The ladies in Hidden Figures seem to be quite emotionally intelligent, I would say, especially Catherine Jackson and Dorothy Vaughn, probably Catherine Johnson. Mary Jackson was probably a little bit more emotional, but it propelled her, right? So also I think that resilience and persistence are so key, especially as an outsider and tough it may be. And lastly, I think that self-awareness and flexibility are very important, and that kind of goes back to the emotional intelligence part. Being aware of who you are and how you're interacting in your space, I think is very key to success.
What about you, Tasha? What would you put at the top of your list if you were advising a young person, especially about what qualities they're going to need as they forge into a group where they're not going to be the dominant group?
I kind of go back and forth on this kind of thinking. So I agree with you and have advised students in particular, to think about all the things that you described. But I'm at this place where I'm also wanting to share with students to be truth tellers and to be strategic. I think that when you're in spaces where you are not the majority, or you are entering into another cultural experience where you'll have to code switch, or you'll have to really learn the culture, it's important to begin for us to be able to tell the truth about that experience. So when I say that, to talk about exactly what it feels like, to communicate the ways in which all the same.
But they will always remember the way that you make them feel. And this movie provides ample instances of the main characters being denied their dignity. And I think we probably all felt that when we not been part of the prevailing group in which we're interacting. And I'm curious, what story or narrative do you tell yourself about the person who's denying you dignified treatment? And how do you carry on despite that? In other words, do the motivations behind people's negative behaviors matter? And how do you proceed constructively in the face of it? Natalie wants to take the first one first.
Sure. For me, I just push through it and with the mentality of wall show them, in a constructive way, not in like an aggressive way, but just like being able to prove that you are capable, it changes a lot of perspectives. Even though that's not the way things should go, and you shouldn't be disqualified or thought, you probably can't handle this just because of your gender or your race. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Tasha or Keena?
I must be scarred from having many. So I think for me it has been about breaking up particular allowances around privilege. And so I have in my life used that technique, but also am at a point where I think it's important to not only use that technique, but to also be able to recognize that the issue is with that person and not necessarily with me, and be able to speak to that and to articulate that, we use the idea that ignorance and the energy around trying to demystify ignorance, or the energy around trying to prove others, actually I feel like takes away from our ability to be our very best selves all the time. And so I've been thinking a lot about what it means for me to have to interrupt a behavior when it's projected onto me. And so that in and of itself, I feel like takes away or chips away at my dignity. So I've used the approach of calling it out because I feel like it's important to break up that narrative. And it makes me feel a lot better. So I do it.
What about you?
Well, the first thing I remind myself is that God don't like ugly. And I know myself well enough to know that I can be what I consider to be assertive, if you will. And having been in the workplace now for, I won't get my age away, but what was the number that you used, 17 and a half years? I think that I have been exposed to and run into all manner of racism, prejudice, bias. I'm very aware now of unconscious bias and realizing that sometimes that people will interact with you in ways that they are unaware of their own biases and the way that it may be coming across to you. As for calling it out, I think that there are ways to do that. It's very empowering to do that. I think that going back to the word strategic that was used earlier, I think that you do have to be strategic unless you're independently wealthy. And you can just be, most of us don't fit into that category. And so we have to be responsible in the way that we are responding or the way that we're acting in the face of that type of adversity. And I always tell the people that I work with and that I've mentored and sponsored that, life is life, and sometimes you have to make different decisions. Sometimes it's just the universe's way of saying that you come to the end of the road at this particular position, and it's time for you to look at other opportunities. And that's very real. Sometimes when you're in your comfort zone, it's hard to deal with that reality, but it is a reality nevertheless. And so that's another way to deal with people who may treat you in a way that is disrespectful and unbecoming to them.
I'm really struck by the wisdom of the strategies that you suggest. I guess this next question is really about who have been your mentors or guide stars or role models? Because it's an awfully lonely path to travel when you forge down a direction where people perhaps haven't gone before or not exactly in the same way. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about one of your mentors, and then from there suggest to the young people in the audience, what would you suggest to them about forming a relationship like that? And I'll let Natalie start perhaps.
Well, my situation's a little unusual. My mom is my mentor. She's a FedEx pilot. Began flying for FedEx when she was 28. So needless to say, she was one of the only women doing that at the time. So for me, it's always been something that I believed I could do, where I know speaking to other women who think about flying, it's, they've been discouraged, like Tasha said, they've been discouraged from math and science. But I have other mentors, and I think it's important to reach out to those women that you feel you can gain some partnerships with and who can help pull you up the ladder. What was the rest of that question, sorry?
What would you suggest to young people in the audience about forming those kinds of relationships? I mean, in this is where they don't have a mother as a great role.
I think it's never too early to start seeking that out and networking. I talked to a lot of other underclassmen who think, oh, it's too soon for me, I'm just a freshman. It's never too soon to start building those relationships and those partnerships.
I would add to the mentor piece, advocates, right? So I think it's really important to have really a strong mentor who you can call on for anything and who is willing to to facilitate and guide and help you negotiate. But I've found also it to be very helpful to have people who I may not call regularly or interact as much as I do with my mentor, who happens to be a former world banker, and is this little woman from Guyana who tells it like it is, and so it tells me like it is, so it's always fun when we get together. But advocates, and so I found those in people who look like me, who don't look like me, but are willing to push for what they think is important, what I share with them is important. And so for young people, I invite you to add to that your portfolio of people, not only mentors, but also advocates, people who are strategically willing to support you as you go along your way.
I agree wholeheartedly. I would also call them champions, simply to cultivate champions, and asking people not only to mentor you, but to sponsor you. There is a distinct difference, and goes to that advocacy. I was reading a story, the woman who just founded, I think it's called Elevest. Does that sound familiar? It's an investment company that caters to women investors, and she had been fired from, I believe, Bank of America twice. And before she decided to strike out on her own. And the second time she got fired, she decided to make phone calls to members of the board to find out, why did this happen to her? And what she found out is she did not have an ally in the room. So when the conversations were being had about how the company, which was undergoing a reorganization, was going through a transformation, that there was nobody in the room who could speak to her work, even though she had done good work, had gotten great reviews. Everybody in the room had somebody else that they were being that ally for, that champion for. So I think that it's important to, whatever space that you're in, to understand who's in the room, who's at the table, and make sure that you're cultivating relationships with those folks who are those important influencers in your space. As far as those of us who are more mature, I believe that it is a responsibility that we have to our community and the spaces that we're in to make sure that we are mentoring, coaching, teaching, that we're present in the spaces that, and I think it's something that we took from, at least I know I took from my experience in grad school, and I'm sure it's something that is definitely, if not, if you're not teaching it, it's part of the experience of the John Glenn College, and it's something that I believe that is very important to ensuring that the legacy of public service that it continues.
I'm really struck by people's willingness to help others, and I think, for young people not to be worried about it having to be a formal arrangement, but just taking the initiative to ask someone to go have coffee and trying to pull in their experience, that can be a start to great things as well.
And I think, particularly as women, I think we are in some ways, whether it's directly or indirectly taught, not to engage that way, right? And so there's this other space where there's these rules of engagement that seem to be out there, and so you kind of, you learn them as you go, where other people feel are at an advantage because they know them. And so I think that, particularly for the young people in the audience, to really think about what are the rules of engagement in terms of how you get ahead in business and other industries, and recognize that the networking and the advocacy and all of that, that's part of the package. And so it's not an additional thing. It's just that sometimes we're taught, I know as a Black woman, I was taught, like, you don't ask somebody for something. You have what you need and you go forward and you do it on your own. And so learning how to ask other people for, you use the word help, but really this is how it's played, this is how you do this. And so, particularly in the workload, I think it's really important to acknowledge that that's really a learned behavior, and there are people who are operating in that every single day.
And I would just add to that, that I would encourage young people and people of all ages actually, because, as a more mature person, there may be an experience that I'm going into where I want to excel. And just because I happen to be, or you happen to be, or anybody happens to be of a certain age, doesn't mean that they can't have a mentor or want to be mentored. I think that it's important to look at experience and not age. I started my career late. I was a stay-at-home mom for many years. And so by the time I got into my public service, by the time I went to grad school, I was already well into my 30s. And so by the time I started my career in public service, I was 30. I don't want you to add those numbers up, right? But my point just is that, I had mentors who were younger than I was at the time. And so when I coached them about mentoring me, they would, kind of look confused, like, okay, wait, and I would say, well, I only have 1 year here at the city of Columbus, and you have 5 or 6. And so that experience that you have garnered, I believe that, I could benefit from your mentorship. And I was able to convince a couple of ladies to provide me with some mentorship. But it's, sometimes it can be a bad experience. Oftentimes we think of young people, we think they have to have a mentor who is, 10 years older than they are, or, 20 years older than they are. But really look for the experience that, might be that somebody might have that you can benefit from.
Natalie, I'm so impressed with the initiative you've taken to found the first chapter of Women in Aviation at Ohio State University. And so I'm wondering, do you find that you younger women are mentoring each other or guiding each other and providing a sounding board and an additional pair of eyes and ears?
Well, first, thank you. It's been a journey and it's been hard, but we did it. And I hope that the chapter continues after I graduate in the fall. Yes, definitely. We mentor each other, even though the age difference isn't that big. Sometimes, like you said, Keena, you have to see who has the experience that you want to build.
between race and gender, or the feminist identity for men. The film outlines how the experience of being a woman in a male-dominated field is quite different from that of being a Black woman in a male-dominated field. So I was wondering if our panelists could talk a little bit about how they think about that relationship between race and feminism. If you were to draw a Venn diagram, is it two intersecting circles where there's common cause in the area of overlap, or is there one large circle for women's interest and there happen to be little circles contained within, depending on one's racial identity? What are your thoughts about that? How should we think about what is in the male-dominated field or a woman with a particular racial identity in a male-dominated field?
It's definitely not an easy question to answer.
So this past year, I think, has really kind of turned a lot of thoughts on its head as far as what we may have been thinking heretofore. As an African American woman, I remember when Hillary Clinton was running for president the first time. And many of my peers, including myself, we were Hillary all the way. And then there became this Black man who came onto the scene and was so impactful. And we switched our alliances. And the divide between European American women and African American women was suddenly revealed. It was a stunning moment for me. I happened to be at the time active in Democratic politics, and there was some healing that needed to happen after that. But I think that it showed how we identify when we talk about identity politics, right? And we talk about things such as the word feminism and those words that we kind of toss around. And I mean, and to be honest with you, I never quite thought of myself as a feminist, even though one of my heroes is probably one of the first feminists, Harriet Tubman, in the South. That was very feminist of her. But I never really thought of myself as a feminist. So I think that we struggle with that question, and it's almost when we saw 94% of the African American women who voted for Hillary Clinton. European women voted a little bit differently. And in the aftermath of this election, there has been the emotions, everybody's so polarized. And so I think, the Women's March that happened on January 21st, maybe that was the beginning of a healing. I think that we have some things in common. And I think that going to draw the Venn diagram, we have a common area. And I think that, we have some work to do in order to make that area so that the circles are actually.
I think that for me personally, so I did not participate in this march. I did not understand it. I did not get why all of a sudden there were people who were so angry when there were many of us that were angry, working on this all the time. And so there was a moment in the film where Miss Vaughn and Caucasian woman are in the bathroom, and they're having this kind of solidarity moment. And to me, that is symbolic of the ways in which white and black women in particular have historically interacted, right? That there's this moment where there's something that is needed, and so then all of a sudden it's like, oh yes, I woke up to what's going on. So I struggled with this particular march because one of the arguments has been that when any woman struggles, right, the intersectionality of it all, that we're all struggling. And so there's this idea that all of a sudden what was being said or the ways that it was, the words that were impacting, that all of a sudden there was some type of impact. And so I had a hard time. And I think that it speaks to the really distinctly different ways that people are experiencing the world. And I don't think that can be lost on us. That even in this moment, in that moment, on January 21st, that there was a coming together, but to me, it was a question of why at that moment, why now? And I know that that seems really unfair for me to question that, but I felt like it was important for me. And so I actually stayed away from a lot of that, which for me, it was my first time not really being involved. And I made some active decisions to really think about the benefit to me going to that particular experience. And so I chose to stay home and give the money to my institution that I would have used, because I was thinking in my mind that for some people that was a really important way for them to demonstrate their dislike or their concern. But I'm really curious about how that continues for people. And so as a person who works at Wilberforce University, I want to produce more Dorothy Vaughn's, right? I want to continue. And if you don't know, she graduated from Wilberforce University, which is in Xenia, Ohio, about an hour, 10 minutes down the road, just to let you know. But I thought it was important to think about how do we create experiences that are that tell the truth, but also don't allow for our stories and voices to be used in particular kinds of ways, and to acknowledge our differences, but to also figure out and to be more intentional about how do we actually work together, right? And create, break down some of these barriers. And so a lot of my white girlfriends were really upset with me. They didn't understand why I was, responding in the way, but I had a really different reaction. And so to me, it just pointed out how distinctly different people's experiences are, even the ways that people responded to some of the things that were said. And I was like, these things are being said all the time. And they're not being said by presidential candidates. They're being said by your boss. They're being said by your family members. They're being said all the time. So why don't we have that same reaction? A policy that directly affects us, and not to say the President of the United States doesn't
March.
I have to agree with Tasha here. I didn't participate either, and I know in the past year, like Keena said, we've seen a lot of things getting turned on its head, so to speak. And I think it's important that we stand up for each other and for women and women of color. And you hear a lot about like feminism and white feminism, where like women of color get left behind, or at least it's something I've heard and read about. You're shaking your head, okay, good.
We'll let you know if you're
But I think it's important, as a white woman to remember that it's not just about white women, it's about all women, and to stand up for each other.
I wonder if we have the fora or venues to do that, to come together and explore those areas of common interest and areas of cooperation. Have you found channels that you find particularly helpful or fruitful?
I wouldn't say necessarily as organized organizations. I think for me the challenge is how do you create allyship? How do you create advocates? How do you do that when it's clear that there's still a hierarchy, right? So racism exists, and when you're trying to navigate, and for me, I'll just kind of tell a little story. So Bell Hooks happens to be one of my mentors also, and so she was the one that pointed out to me that you know, race and gender, like you can't necessarily separate those two. Because I had always kind of moved through the world as a Black person. And so my identity as a woman came later for me. And so I think what's hard about it is that our relationships. And for many of us, we've never really thought about it, right? We particularly isolate ourselves around the idea of race. And so coming together to have conversations about what does it mean to actually have an agenda for women, right? That isn't about, so I'm also very radical in the sense I'm not really interested in equality. It's a really complex notion for me, but the idea that I want to be better than oppression, right? I want to be better than that idea. And so for me, it's about creating spaces where we're not talking just about equality or how we can be supportive, but really actually talk about
Are, as Black women, are forced to live in our race and not often permitted to live in our gender. Where the experience for European European American women may be different. When you look at me, the very first thing that you see is that I'm Black. And that is your primary reaction to me versus the fact that I am a woman. And because of the racial history of our country, then that brings along a lot of baggage and bias and prejudice, et cetera, which mutes and smothers my womanhood. And that might be, right, we think of European American women as being placed on a pedestal, so to speak, whereas African American women were meant to serve that which is on the pedestal. And so now as we come closer.
Any questions? You didn't get, you have it covered in book club or something like that.
Okay. Hi everyone. I have a question written down here. So like Tasha said, discrimination is still very present today, and racism still exists. It might not be as overt as shown in the movie in public service here today, who would you say are the hidden figures? And what specific political and or social barriers do you think those figures face when it comes to career advancement?
I don't know if I can answer the question around the hidden figure is why these stories are so unbelievable because we get information all the time. But I do want to say something about the idea that we still have to give up. And, you know, in the film, I don't necessarily think that much work goes into the aviation, but the book gets much deeper into really what the experiences of Julie Dorothy Vaughan were. And so I think about, you know, her running to the bathroom, all those kinds of things, and how that takes away from people being able, it's symbolic, because that actually didn't happen, but symbolic of how it takes away from people being able to be their best self in spaces when you have to think about things as simple as, do I straighten my hair or do I wear it naturally so that I can be accepted in a particular environment?
I just have a little bit to add. I know in aviation, I've been told, and I've had other women tell me that the more you look like a man when you interact with the industry, like the better your chances of being taken seriously. So I've been told, you know, wear pants, don't wear a skirt, don't wear a dress, wear muted colors, pull your hair back, cut your hair. This is an unprofessional life. You know, certain airlines like to be hired and to work on, they have hair policies for women on like how you should wear it and how to look. And I agree with Tasha. It's, you know, it makes it that much harder. And I've gone to job interviews where I do wear, you know, pants, and you know they're still asking me like, are you sure you're okay with doing this job? You know, and I'm like, this is a job interview. I'm dressed as a job interview, you know. So that's definitely a struggle. Is, you know, those extra rules that apply on how to look at work.
Hi. Okay. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but so you were saying that the movie kind of took a little bit of liberties compared to the book. And there have been, not necessarily criticisms, but, just conversation about how the movie, with it being like rated PG, didn't really portray like maybe how terrible, some of the situations, during segregation were. So I was just wondering your opinion on whether or not you think that was appropriate in this context, or if you think they should have been a little bit more dramatic.
That's an interesting question. I think the closer you can get to the truth, the better it is for everyone. I guess I would say that in the world that we live in, I think the story itself is a very important one. And I guess it depends on the story that we want to tell. And not we, because I believe this is a Fox production, and that's important because depending on who's making this film and what is the story that they're trying to get out, and the fact that they're looking to make something that's palatable for lots of folks and make lots of money, right? So it takes panels like this to kind of, dig a little bit deeper into the story that, or the experience of these three women in this particular situation. I think that's a very interesting question because it's all about perspective, right? I have not read the book, so I can't comment from them, but I think that, I think you were saying that you have read the book, Tashia? So you may want to comment on that a little bit better than I can.
Yeah, I think, so I'm going to critique, right? So I'm going to do that real quick. One of the challenges for me with the film in particular, and even having not read the book before I saw the film, was something that I think in the question you framed was around Kevin Costner's character. And being careful with the ways in which the narrative, this reoccurring narrative of particularly a white male savior, if you will, continues to reappear in our films, and also the Black woman as a superhero, right? The fact that she's running around trying to go to the bathroom and doing these mathematical problems, this is genius, right? Continues to reintroduce to us this idea that Black women are superheroes, right? In this non-human way, or superhuman, excuse me. And in some ways that's really interesting, right? Because you're watching these women overcome something really, really significant, like segregation, and be stellar. But at the same time, how does this continue to edify our minds that there are particular groups of people that can overcome things and there's no danger or harm to them? And so I struggled with that part, right? Because I get why they were taking the liberty to try to tell the story in this quick kind of 2 hours. But I also think it's important for us, if we're going to have a big conversation, to be able to say and look at it and go, okay, why is this male centered in the way that he's centered, right? What's the value, and who is this going to be important to? And can people actually look at that and go, oh wait, this probably isn't true, right? So, what's the value of centering him in that way? So I struggled with the film in that part in many parts, but because it appeared in a particular kind of way when the story is really about the women and their brilliance. And why couldn't it focus on that and push him back further into the background? And I won't give it away, so read the book. You'll get more as to why it bothered me as much as it did. But I also think that it's Hollywood. So, it's Hidden Figures, and it's this really wonderful book. And I also had the pleasure of hosting Dorothy Vaughn's daughter last night, so I have a little bit more information as well. But that's also part of us, again, not getting to tell our own stories, right, in particular kinds of ways. And how do we continue to be excited about the fact that Hidden Figures tells this really important story, but still not having ownership of how the story is told.
This year seems to be a very significant year for Black filmmaking. And the documentary that's playing here on Thursday is I'm Not Your Neighbor. And 13th also. So for me, at least, it's the first time where I've and really felt like people are owning their own stories. They're able to deliver it without airbrushing. And I think hopefully that's a trend that will continue in the future. But for me, this was very much a hallmark production, feel-good story, and lots of ugly truths were glossed over.
Very corporate, very much a revenue generator and having to be crafted in that manner to be greenlit, if you will. I think it's a term that's used in Hollywood in order to be produced and to get that story out of the ladies that we have to be able to tell our own stories. More so the independent filmmakers. You think about Spike Lee and some other filmmakers who have taken a chance and who are able to produce independently and have reached a certain level of success in doing that. They're very, very, very important.
Did we have one other question? No.
Yeah, I have a question.
One more.
My question is, what impact do you think this book and film will have on the interest of young women, particularly African American women and Latino, Native American women, in STEM careers going forward? Science, technology, engineering, and math. What impact do you think about that?
I think it has great impact. I've already seen, as I said last night, I hosted Dorothy Bonsar, and we had an elementary school that came out, and the young women were gripping this book. Even additionally to that, the way that it's impacting older people to encourage young people, particularly young girls, to participate in particular kinds of ways. And so to me, that was really what was also very exciting, is that I was seeing and I've been hearing people who may not have been thinking about, particularly young women, participating in particular things, who are now really excited and have a way going forward to think about the value of all minds, being able to be their full, people being able to be their full selves. So
I think your question gets to the heart of how do we explain what's normal to our young people, and it's so much easier to question homogeneity in a particular career if they never see anything different. So we have to make sure that diversity looks normal, and not just STEM fields, but many others. So, well, thank you both, all three of you, Keena and Tashia and Natalie, for your time and for your willingness to open up and share your personal perspectives and your stories on the fun films. Thank you very much. Thank you.